everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. I'm your host, Limor Bergman-Gross, and today I have an incredible guest with me. Her name is Dagna Bieda. And Dagna went from coding robots to helping ambitious engineers rewrite the real code that determines their success. The code in their minds. After she experienced burnout herself and discovered the power of changing her mindset, Dagna created a unique coaching method called Brain Refactor that's helped hundreds of tech professionals overcome imposter syndrome, conquer burnout, and take control of their careers. We're diving into how our thoughts can be like bugs in a program and what we can do to debug our mental code for better results. If you are ready to reprogram your mind and take your career to the next level, then you love what's coming up. Stay tuned and let's jump right in and hear how Dagna cracked the code for career success. Hi Dagna, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here, Limor.
Absolutely, my pleasure having you here today, and we share kind of some similarity in our journey. You're also an engineer like myself, and you became a coach. So maybe tell us a little bit about how did you transition from engineering to coaching?
Yeah, that's a interesting thing. In my engineering career, I always chased impact because as a teenager, I wanted to build the future, whatever that means in the mind of a teenager. So when I ended up picking up what to study, what kind of career to pursue, I ended up studying control engineering and robotics because it was like the most futuristic thing that I could find. So I thought to myself, oh, surely this is me creating the future by building the robots. And after I graduated, I thought that actually, when you have a job as someone building robots, first of all, it takes a lot of time. And second of all, the robots that I was building within the company I was working for, it was kind of like one of those European Union sponsored projects. That was a huge collaboration project with the company that I worked in and different universities across European Union. A lot of the time, those robots end up in a lab somewhere at a university, and maybe a few PhD students will ever touch them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I quickly realized this is not the kind of impact that I'm looking for. And then I transitioned to software engineering because at just click of one deployment, you can have like millions of end users using something that you've created. So I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's impact, right? And then as a part of crazy things that happened in my life, falling in love, I ended up moving from Poland to United States. And in that software engineering journey, I experienced the cultural differences between working in Poland as a software engineer and then in United States as a software engineer, having that heavily immigrant background and like a completely different way of thinking than my peers here did. So I ended up switching jobs, moving up, getting impact that I thought was what I was pursuing all this time. But in reality, I ended up burning myself out. And, as a software engineer, something that brought me a lot of pleasure, tracking down bugs, creating new features, improving and optimizing our code base. It came to a point where it didn't really bring that much pleasure anymore. I just burned myself out. And it came kind of crushing down on this one September day in 2019 when I came into work and I'm having this one-on-one with my manager. And it's like a regular one-on-one, no big questions, nothing really big. And Limor, this is so embarrassing to say, but I started crying in that one-on-one at work. And in my mind, it's like, oh my goodness, I am being so unprofessional Like, this isn't me. Who's this person? But it was a turning point. It helped me realize, okay, I need some help. I need to stop pretending that things are fine when they're not fine. Clearly, because I'm crying at work. And, I can laugh about it now, but back then it wasn't really funny.
Of course.
So I ended up finding a therapist. And after just a few months of having deep conversations with someone who knew exactly what it is that I went through, I changed my perspective. I changed how I did things. I understood a lot of things about myself just because I had this person who got me, And that's when it clicked. And I was like, oh, wow, this is the kind of impact that I really want to have on another person's life. Because with one aha moment, everything can shift. Your entire perspective, behavior, things click, and it changes your life. And that's the kind of impact I've been wanting. So that's when I decided that that's what I want to do. I want to have that kind of impact on people's lives. And I made that transition from being an engineer to being a coach for engineers and ambitious professionals in tech.
Yeah. And can you share a little bit just what was the shift for you? Like, how did it look like?
The shift, it was really understanding on how I came to be. Now, full disclosure, I come from a background that's like therapy. I don't need this, right? I mean, my grandparents lived through the World War, first and second. And so the kind of life that I had, you would think, oh, I didn't have any problems. I had food, I had shelter, I had 2 parents, I had siblings, I had family, I had support system in place. So like, what could go wrong? Therapy wasn't for me until I realized that how you grew up, your life shapes you. And it doesn't have to be traumatic to create bugs and inefficiencies in your mental code, right? As a coach, what I realized, because I like to say that I moved from programming computers to reprogramming human minds, because that's what I do with my clients. And in therapy, I realized that a lot of how we think about code and software relates to the brain, right? Like when you have an app, a program, whatever, if something's not working, it's because there's a bug. There's something in the code that's not compiling, that's not creating the outcomes that you're trying to create for yourself. Same thing applies to the brain, right? So in therapy, and coaching is also a great mechanism to do that, is where you kind of dive into how your legacy mental code has been set up by the lifetime of experiences. So, if you will, going back to your question, that first therapy sessions were kind of like debugging sessions for me. I jumped into the code, I analyzed what was already in there, and I had this epiphany like, oh, if it's not working, if I change that line of code, other things will change too. And lo and behold, I started figuring out what things need to be put into place in my mental code for my life to get better and get out of burnout.
Okay. So you're saying you find out how you can change your behaviors, basically, in order to make an impact.
It's more than that, though, right? Because if you just change your behavior without changing the underlying code of what you believe to be true about yourself or the world around you, that behavior is not going to stick. It's not going to last. It's a temporary patch that's executed while you're aware and manually putting that command in, right? But it's not going to stick. It's not going to get committed to the repo.
Okay. So let's talk about your book, Brain Refactor, and you talk about, obviously, what you mentioned, optimizing your internal code. Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
To thrive in tech. So can you explain kind of how you use this metaphor when coaching individuals? Particularly, we're talking about like people in tech and common challenges like imposter syndrome, burnout, and communication.
Absolutely. So, a lot of the time when I work with someone and on my own journey of growth, I realize that whenever you're facing an obstacle, a lot of the time you are the obstacle or how you think about the problem. That's the real obstacle, not what you think it might be. And whenever I work with someone, whether that's about getting past imposter syndrome, getting out of burnout, um, figuring out how to deal with other people, or how to improve your self marketing skills, we always go back to the code. We always go into the debugging and the analysis, the root cause analysis of like what creates your code to function the way it does and create the outcomes it currently does. And we plan out a refactor. We sit down and figure out, okay, instead of this, I want to be thinking this. Instead of acting like that, I want to be acting like that. Okay, how is this tied to my core identity, right? And how can I change those things?
Mhm. So can you share some kind of strategies of how you can use this when, uh, let's say, imposter syndrome? This is a big one, especially for women in tech. So how can I use that in order to overcome imposter syndrome, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go ahead and find this really cool piece on imposter syndrome from the book that I would love to read, if
Mhm.
that's okay. There's a whole chapter called Debugging the Imposter Syndrome with two case studies of my actual clients who were able to get past imposter syndrome as a result of our work together. But the way that I define imposter syndrome is essentially this loop, this routine that gets stuck in execution. Because everybody has doubts, everybody has worries, everybody feels every now and then, I don't know what I'm doing. That's normal. And it's not imposter syndrome. Okay, this is just regular worry sprinkled with doubt, and it's normal because you're growing. Our environment is rapidly changing. It makes sense to feel that way. But the imposter syndrome is essentially when it spirals down, when it gets out of control. And that routine is taking over our mental resources and doesn't let us move forward. It keeps us stuck. So here's the piece I would like to read. I give this story that kind of shows how imposter syndrome often looks like, because it a lot of the time affects people early in their career, but also if you step into a new role. So
Mhm.
I talk about Linda. Linda gets promoted from an engineering position to a more leadership position, and she leads a team of engineers. And one of the features that her team delivers causes an outage and causes loss of money for the company, which is a big blow, right? So here's what happens. Linda's internal programming will determine if the challenge of her new role is overwhelming or if it's beneficial. The outcome has nothing to do with the situation itself, the major failure causing an outage, and everything to do with her mental programming, how it interprets the event. Either the imposter syndrome will take over, allowing the overwhelm to kick in, or she can lean into the growing pains and experience a transformative growth spurt. So, again, what happens next all depends on the internal mental programming that assigns meaning to what's going on. If Linda's legacy mental code is running the imposter syndrome routines, she might think, oh, I knew I wasn't cut out for this role. I've been just fooling everyone and it's blown up right in my face. Everyone probably thinks I am incompetent now. I can't believe I let this happen. I should not have been promoted. I'm not capable of handling this level of responsibility. My luck has finally run out. I am not skilled enough for this job. It's clear that I don't belong here. Right? Does that sound familiar?
Unfortunately, sound very familiar, both on a personal level and also from my clients, for sure.
But if Linda's mental code allows her to lean into the growing pains, she will probably think something like this. Okay, this was a major setback, but it's all part of the learning process. I need to figure out what went wrong and how to prevent it in the future. And even though this failure is tough to swallow, I know it doesn't define me. It doesn't define my abilities or my worth. I mean, I gotta be real. I am new to this role and I haven't found my footing yet. I'm facing new challenges, the kind I have not ever faced before. So failures are inevitable. But I've overcome challenges before. I am capable of learning from those mistakes and improving. So I'm just gonna stay focused, stay positive, seek feedback, and keep moving forward. Notice that the event didn't change, right? That failure causing an outage is still there. The company lost money. People are probably disappointed. But what happens, the main difference is what she's thinking. How her internal code assigns the meaning to what happened, because that affects her behavior, right? Mm-hmm. If it's the imposter syndrome that takes over, she's going to withdraw. She might ask for a demotion because she doesn't feel ready. But if she leans into the growing pains, which is normal part of growth we often see in kids, right? If she can lean into the growing pains, she can continue gaining more mastery and proficiency and confidence by learning from her mistakes. So depending on which of the mental code routines is getting triggered in her mind, she's going to create a completely different set of outcomes for herself.
Okay. So if naturally, the tendency of her is to go into the imposter syndrome, what can she do in order to start changing that code, I would call it?
First of all, realize that it's happening. A lot of the times, our code runs like operating system. It runs on autopilot. As the end user, you don't have to do anything other than press a button for your computer to start up, for the desktop programs to pop up, right? You don't really have to do anything. But if you notice that there's a process that is running in the background that's unhelpful, you have to be aware. You have to catch yourself thinking those things, the process happening, being executed, and stop it. Kill it. If we could log into the terminal of your brain and just do a super user command and just kill that process, boom, kill imposter syndrome. What was it? You can just stop the process effectively. So how that happens in your brain is you have to be aware, notice what's happening, and then you have to implement a script that will not only terminate the bad process, but also put something different, something else in place, a different kind of reaction, a different kind of behavior, different kind of set of beliefs or thoughts, right? Because here's the thing. Most of us does not have Psychology 101, but in Psychology 101, typically students learn that our thoughts are not true, but we believe our thoughts. We rarely question them. The thoughts are kind of like log messages, and they're just artifacts. Someone put it out there, and now it's printing. Mm-hmm. But guess what? I can go into that code. I can refactor that line. I don't need to see that log message anymore. So I know it sounds simple.
It doesn't sound simple at all, to be honest. It sounds like something that you have to be conscious about and practice.
Oh, yes.
So whenever those thoughts come to your mind, like, well, maybe I'm not capable. Am I stupid? Am I even worthy? What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. To catch yourself with those thoughts and try to rewire, kind of as you said, kill that process and start a new process of, okay, um, what happened here happened, and I want to leverage that as a learning opportunity and figure out how I can grow from it.
Exactly. The reason I said it sounds simple because often as a software engineer, software developer, you literally go into the code, delete that line, and that's it. You commit it to the repo, deploy the code to production. You don't have to see that line anymore. But you're absolutely right, Limor. Whenever it comes to your vlogs right here, in your mind, it it requires effort and attention to put into place in order to change that programming. Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing that story, which I'm sure that many of our audience listeners can relate to. So when you find those thoughts coming to your head, just as Dagna recommends, to really be conscious about those thoughts and challenge them, right? And challenge those thoughts and stop it. Stop that line of thinking and start rewiring to think about opportunities. How is that an opportunity? And this is something, by the way, that I always talk with my clients every time they come with a challenge. How is that an opportunity? And a lot of times it's very difficult to look at things that happen to us that, as you said, like this outage, like a bad thing happens. How can you even think about it as a positive thing or look at it at a different light? But in fact, every challenge that happens to us is an opportunity. I truly believe in that. It's an opportunity for us to overcome it and to grow from it and become better.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And we both do coaching, so we both help people essentially update their software, right? And what
Yeah.
it is that they're thinking in their minds.
Yeah.
Because that's the key. If you can optimize your brain that's involved in literally everything that you do, everything in life improves too.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you've seen it with your clients as well.
Yeah. And as you said, I mean, it's not easy. And I think that one of the other things I would say that I really encourage people to be kind to themselves, because we tend to be very judgmental toward ourselves and very harsh. And we need to be compassionate and be willing to let ourselves grow steadily and slowly, because sometimes it takes time and effort, right? I mean, it's not easy. So just be kind to yourself and give yourself the time.
Absolutely. I'm going to add on top of that, not being kind is the default state. And it comes from what I call the caveman configuration of the modern mind. Because if you think about the human evolution as a species, it's very recently that we've had to dealt with being ever connected to the internet or going to the grocery store to get all our food instead of actually either growing the food or hunting for the food. So it's a very tiny speck of the dust on the timeline of our evolutionary history as human species. So that caveman configuration is really what makes us not just not be kind, but also notice the bad, what's negative, what's potentially harmful, and focus on that, because guess what? That used to help our survival. It's also on default set up in our mind to relive difficult moments so that we can learn from them, even if they're not deadly anymore, right? Back in the caveman times, you might be thinking about getting past being attacked by a tiger, right? Now you might be thinking about that fight you had with your partner. Even though it's not deadly, our brains kind of focus and magnify those negative things happening in our life. And the fact that we need to consciously rewire our brains to notice the good stuff and be kind to ourselves, having that self-love that is a foundation for confidence, that is really an effort to update our minds from that caveman configuration into the modern reality that we live in right now.
Absolutely. And I want to shift to a different topic that we talked about assertive communication and
Yes,
psychological safety. And you highlight that. I know that also in your book. So can you share some techniques about kind of effectively fostering psychological safety and also like how do you become assertive without being aggressive, which is also a challenge that many women face.
absolutely. So the first thing that I want to kind of jump to is understanding what makes difficult conversations difficult, what makes communication difficult, especially with that caveman configuration running, right? A lot of the time when we come into communication, we feel like there might be negative outcomes. And before even having a conversation, we might start to worry that, there's a lot of risks. There's a risk of negative consequences, fear of like strong or negative emotions that might rise up as we're communicating with other people. Like, oh, if they're judging us, for example, there's potential for conflict whenever we communicate with others, or even worse, there's a potential for criticism. And all those factors that are playing right into the caveman configuration of our mind make it difficult to be an excellent communicator and collaborator. And that's where the psychological safety that you mentioned comes into play. According to polyvagal theory, when we feel safe, psychologically safe in a conversation with another person, that's when we're able to connect with them with open-mindedness and curiosity and have patience and really listen to what it is that they're trying to say without tapping into all those defense mechanisms that are there to protect us, right? Again, back from the caveman times. So in order to feel psychologically safe in a conversation, you can do things for yourself and you can do things for other people to make sure that they are psychologically safe and can actually listen and pay attention, right? Because here's what happens. Whenever we come across as aggressive or passive aggressive, people tend to raise their psychological defense and either freeze or fight or flight. And then we're not getting our points across, right? But then on the other hand, if we're too passive, people just don't pay attention. So the sweet spot is really having the assertive communication skills in place because they help us bring that psychological safety into a conversation, right? So assertive communication is basically when we are able to create a respectful environment. By respectful, I mean, on one hand, we acknowledge what other people bring to the table. On the other hand, we also respect our own opinion. And we create that respectful environment so that we can express our concerns, right? Either state our needs or our wants. And we do so in an appropriate manner, or if we want to propose a solution or set of solutions. And we're trying to do that without trying to be manipulative, without trying to blame anyone, without bringing any judgment to a conversation about like who caused this problematic situation that we're trying to solve right now. And it's really about practicing in every communication. And I want to tie it to a story too, because for many women, speaking up is the issue. For me, the opposite was an issue. I would often come across as aggressive, too direct. People would think I'm mean. And of course, they didn't want me to be their leader because who would want to have a mean leader, right? And this company that I worked for had a difficult situation. They had to let people go. And at the end, we were having like all hands on meeting. everybody could ask questions. They clarified the reasons why people were let go. And I'm like, can I ask a question or a few questions? Because in my mind, they haven't thought through the entire problems that might come from letting people go. And I'm asking a question. And imagine my surprise, Limor, when an engineering director comes to me after the meeting and he's like, Dagna, why did you call our leadership executive team a team of idiots? And I'm like, what? I did not say that. And he's like, okay, but that's how it came across. And that was like such a huge aha moment. It's like, it doesn't matter what you intended to say. It matters how it came across.
Mm-hmm.
So with assertive communication, we can practice getting our point across and making sure that people listen.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think is really important is not just what we say, but also how we say. And I don't remember who said that, but I think most of our communication is actually not verbal, not the word we say, rather than how we say things, like a voice tone or expressions, the way our body moves, our face. And those things are
Absolutely.
really important. So I can say the exact same words in multiple ways, and they will be interpreted differently.
Yes. That is very true. And I would add to that the cultural context also matters, because you can say the same thing with the same tone to two people who grew up in a different parts of the world, and they will take that completely differently, right? Which adds another layer of complexity to figuring out how to be an effective communicator that can actually be able to lead and have people just follow, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that based on your story, I mean, I think it's very important to really get feedback from people, how you're coming across, people who are willing to share. So you can learn, because a lot of times we don't have that self-awareness of what we're saying and how we're coming across. And hearing that from someone else can really give us insights we haven't thought about.
Yes. And for me, being a bad communicator, I had to hear about it from like different sources over years, right? So I wasn't really accepting that feedback in, because people were telling me that I come off too strong. And I was like, you're just being too sensitive. I would just brush it off because I wasn't ready to listen.
Yeah.
But when my coworker, the engineering director, came over and said that, I was like, oh, that's why I'm not getting that promotion I wanted. Okay, I just need to work on the communication, because my tech skills were excellent, and I was still not getting what I wanted in terms of career advancement. That's when my ears opened and I actually accepted that feedback.
Yeah, wonderful. Before we end our conversation today, I think like we can talk for hours, but like before we end, is there anything else you would like to share, Dagna?
Yes, absolutely. So my book is currently available on Amazon. And depending on when we air this episode, by October 1, all three versions, paperback, hardcover, and Kindle, are going to be available all over the world. So I highly, highly encourage that you jump in and get a sample if you like the piece that I read. And if you found that the conversation we had today resonated, I'm sure you'll enjoy the book.
Absolutely, and I'll definitely put a link to your book. Thank you so much, Dagna, for being here today and sharing all that wisdom.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure talking to you today. Thank you, Limor.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode with Dagna. And before you go, I have something super special for you next week. Have you ever wondered why women get stuck in middle management? Or why conventional career advice just doesn't seem to work? If so, you definitely cannot miss next week's episode. I'm so honored to sit down with the incredible Susan Colantuno. And she's the woman behind the viral TED Talk, The Career Advice You Probably Didn't Get. That TED Talk got over 4.5 million views. And Susan reveals what's really holding women back and shares the missing piece of advice that no one talks about. Trust me, this episode is going to change the way you see your career path. Hit the subscribe button and get ready. You don't want to miss this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Have a wonderful day.